We are really happy to have this opportunity to talk about an issue that's very dear to the members of Nodutdol. Nodutdol, for those who don't know, is a progressive organization made up of members of the Korean diaspora in America and allies. And one of the core beliefs of all the members of Nodutdol is the peaceful reunification of the Korean peninsula. And so we put together this teach-in not as experts in policy or as experts in history, but really as people who are engaged in community and activists who are presenting our particular viewpoint onto the current peace talks and issues in the Korean peninsula. Today, of course, marks the 65th anniversary of the signing of the Korean armistice in July 27th, 1953. Now, the armistice brought a halt to the Korean War, but as we know, in October of 1953, the US and the Republic of Korea, South Korea, entered a mutual defense agreement, breaking the armistice. And to date, there's been no official peace treaty signed between North and South Korea. So the Korean War is technically ongoing. It is an ongoing conflict. The US, of course, still has something like 30,000 troops stationed in South Korea. And so this history, the history of the quote-unquote forgotten war, as it's called in America, the Korean War, is really the crucial backdrop to everything that we'll be discussing tonight. And historical context is very important to Nodutdol in terms of making sense of these current issues. 5 years ago, members of this group and other allies marched on the White House saying 60 years since the armistice was long enough and that it was time to sign a peace treaty. 5 years later, a lot of us were dismayed to hear last year talks of a possible nuclear war. There was some very alarming and disconcerting talk happening from the White House. And so a lot of us, I think, were very gratified and interested and hopeful, tentatively, to see the developments this year. The cooperation between the North and South at the Pyeongchang Olympics. Of course, the historic summit in April between President Moon of South Korea and Kim Jong-un of North Korea. And of course, the historic summit in June between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, which was the first time a US president has met with the leader of North Korea since the Korean War. So what we're going to do this evening is present, we have 3 volunteers, Betsy representing North Korea, Yujin representing South Korea, and Rose, who will be discussing the US. So this triangle, right, of politics that we're very much engaged in, how will these peace talks impact travel between North and South Korea?
I think the hope is that they will facilitate travel between North and South Korea, but I don't know.
There's the idea of connecting the railway system so that you can travel by railway. Yeah, I don't know if I can speak to what that will look like, border control and stuff like that, but it is built into the declaration, the Minjung declaration, that there's hopes to open up this railway. And going back to the youth again, maybe this is not the best reason why reunification is great, but I've heard a lot of people say oh, we can take the train all the way through Asia and go to Europe. Not that Europe shouldn't be the most desirable place, I think, but that there is those ideas being
So why in this discussion isn't there more concern for the nuclear buildup in the US? The mass of nuclear arms in the United States, why isn't the denuclearization of the United States on the table?
I think that's a good question. I think it should be on the table, but to speak to what Ray was mentioning earlier about the uniformity of the U.S. narrative is that whenever they talk about denuclearization, it's never mentioned. This combined with their persistent failure to commit to their own agreements that they've initiated with North Korea makes me sadly skeptical of the prospects, although it is hope. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem. It seems so. The amount of U.S. Nuclear arms seems so huge and like something they would never give up. It's funny that we're, the narrative is all about why can't the North Koreans give theirs up?
These are two, I think, interrelated questions. One is, in all of the talk of the nuclearization efforts in North Korea, what is the impact on the material lives of everyday people in North Korea? So the nuclear program, what is the impact on the material lives of people in North Korea? And then the second question, which is related, is how will the history of North Korea's human rights violations play into the process of reunification? And I assume this means in North Korea-US relations.
Okay, so as I said earlier, the state of war and tension on the Korean Peninsula and economic sanctions contribute to a degraded quality of life for North Koreans, and this includes the fact that a larger proportion of the national budget or whatever is allocated specifically to military needs. And North Korea themselves have stated that if they could avoid having to spend so much money on their defense, they would be able to build up their society in the way that they envisioned. There are people who say, there is the perspective that such a high proportion, by allocating such a high proportion to defense, they are doing a disservice to the people. And I think we should also look at the U.S. military budget as well in that case. But I think also the rationale, I suppose, by the government, by the North Korean government for doing so has been to defend their status as a state and to maintain a socialist lifestyle. So I think definitely for both North and South Korea, an absence of a state of war on the peninsula would allow both countries to not only would allow both countries to allocate more funds to the lives of everyday people. I thought that was a question. As for human rights, I think human rights, the question of human rights violations in North Korea is very complicated. When we were there most recently in 2015, they were very interested in the question of why there is so much police violence in the United States. And because we met with some traffic safety officers, and there is a different, I think that the question of North Korean human rights is very complicated, and there is a lot of discussion, and it could be a forum in and of itself. But I think in terms of if we're going to talk about North Korean human rights violations during the negotiations, there should also be a discussion about U.S. human rights violations, but that's not going to happen. Peace and normalized relations would allow for more transparency on both sides about the human rights. There is a lot of non-transparency. There's a lot of opacity around exactly the allegations and how they can be verified and stuff like that. And so there is a lot of uncertainty by certain scholars about the validity of claims of the degree and varying things. And we must also remember that every nation has a prison system. So a peace process and normalized relations would allow for more transparency around these issues rather than unbridled speculation and unsubstantiated claims from either side.
So we had a pair of questions about the prospects of unifying the economies of North and South Korea. One about that quote about North Korean laborers being exploitable, more or less. And then this question about what, assuming the two economies unify, what activists in the South might be doing to prepare for the potential economic exploitation and colonization of northern workers by southern businesses.
I'll start off answering. So dishearteningly, but also somewhat predictably, two of the major corporations in South Korea have already done assessment studies of how to fully take advantage of, the resources of North Korea. I think it was Hyundai and Samsung, and so yes, that's unsettling and all of a sudden. But activists in South Korea are thinking about this question very deeply. So the industrial complex that is the shared industrial city, Kaesong Industrial Complex, when it was active, and this was many years ago, they blocked large corporations from taking part in it. So it was on a smaller to medium scale. And this was a place for the North Koreans and South Koreans to cooperate economically. And also North Korea is also at the table with labor unions in the South, trying to make sure that that they're not going to be taken advantage of by these larger corporations. So there is this question is definitely on the table.
Most of you may know that there is in North Korea there is a trade union, and trade union is almost like a government agency, and that a lot of people I think is trying to see that trade union is a government control rather than the workers' benefit. But the trade union in all the different work sites kind of work as a national committee to make sure in the Kaesong Industrial Complex when that happened, and then also in the free economic zones and free trade zones that how many of them? Kim 선생님? 22. So there are already in the US, in the North Korea, there are 22 special economic and trade zones, for the past 5 years to set up. And in there, the bargaining power is represented as by the trade union. And they are really firm, and they have been preparing it since 2002. They had educations and seminars from the Switzerland company, consultant that we met in one of our trips. So it's not like, it's inevitable. We don't think it's inevitable. We think it's much more going to be a hard bargaining of the people to people. North Korean people are not eager to be exploited either. They are educated and they are very smart and strong people. So another thing is that's why North Korean states are not really so eager to merge the system under the reunification. When there is a discrepancy, and just like what we know of reunification comes a lot from the German model. In Germany, because of the discrepancy in economic power in the West and East Germanies, that there were a lot of problems that is happening. It's not unequal bargaining powers. So learning from that there are a lot of studies about how to maintain a separate system and then have it like, just like a currency. So, one South Korean $1 would be different from like North Korean dollars. So that to protect the North Korean and have an independent system. But there are a lot of things in the studies, but we'll see when this happens, then we'll see. And I'm positively sure the unions and people will be able to critically view it and make sure that our voices are heard.
I just want to add that the perspective by that economist who is like, it's like South Korea without the labor unions, is a vision of reunification that's called absorption, whereas North Korea's proposal of reunification would be more of a confederated system where as Judah mentioned, they maintain their system. Also, an anecdote, there were these keto negotiations. I don't remember what keto stands for. KEDO? Development Korean Energy Development Organization, and one sticking point in the negotiations is that the U.S. and other parties wanted to hire North Korean laborers for a very low price, and the North Korea would not budge. They would not agree to their their people being employed at such a low rate. So then the people who were trying to hire them had to go elsewhere for cheaper labor. That ended up being just as expensive because they had to fly them in and do all this other stuff. So I think history has shown that at least government-wise, they're not going to just be like, okay, take everybody and don't pay them.
My neighbors in Manhattan are surprised to hear that many South Koreans are actually for reconciliation and reunification. So how can we help more Americans to know about not only North Korea, but South Korea as well, South Koreans? So without question in the air, we're going to do our breakout groups. So you're going to have an option of joining one of 3 discussions led by Juyeon, Betsy, and Minjung. And I'm going to invite you 3 to just say a little bit about what you want to discuss with your group tonight.
I was thinking that, we have a very complex feelings about the U.S. and U.S. left movement. In a sense that, U.S. has a really deep and huge involvement or interference, intervention, or aid. However you view it, U.S. has a very strong presence in Korea's recent history. And so as a Korean diaspora living in the U.S., looking at the Korea and Korean affairs, what are our feelings? How do we feel about and what's our goals? I think that's a complex question. It's not really simple, but I thought that maybe we can start talking about it.
The group that I'll be meeting with, if anyone is interested, is talking about North Korea as an anti-imperialist project. So as you all know, or as you may have heard, right before the division of Korea in the Korean War in 1950 to 53, Korea was colonized by Japan, and so the establishment of North Korea, the way that we talk about it, was as a resistance to yet another colonizer, basically. And that's anti-imperialist / a socialist an experiment in socialism. So if you want to talk about that a little bit, that's what we'll be discussing.
My group, I guess, will be talking about how can the discussion of peace in Korea be integrated into a discussion of progressive politics? Because as we've discussed before, there's tons of issues going on. There's the Israel-Palestine issue, there's human rights violations everywhere. And so, instead of being like, Korea is the only issue and you should do Korea issue over everything because it's the most important, we want to talk with you to figure out how we can integrate all these different issues that are a product of U.S. imperialism and U.S. power, and how we can sort of create a more unified narrative so that it's not like pockets of projects here and there, but more of a unified resistance.
What we're going to do now is have a quick report back from each of the 3 groups so you can hear what happened in the groups you weren't a part of.
So we talked about as Korean Americans, our feelings for the U.S. and the U.S. The left movement. And we discussed how sometimes when we see videos about North Korea on YouTube or social media, it's kind of very sad, how demonized they are, although they're the same Koreans. And we had some of us who are conservative in Korea end up being liberals here, going to Quaker meetings and Veterans for Peace meetings, realizing that these people in the left, quote unquote, they tend to be more accepting and willing to learn about Korea. Both the right and the left has really no idea about Korea. And there is definitely a bit of difference between, different groups within the Democrats and like the Schumer Pelosi versus like Bernie Sanders kind of people. And definitely like both prioritize national security, but I feel like the Democrats, socialists tend to want to like spend more money on U.S. Healthcare and education than military, and that's probably a good thing for both Korea and the U.S. And they say that they're pro-immigrant, anti-racism, but only a few months ago we saw that some people in the left are so anti-Trump that they were against the Korean peace movement because Trump was doing that, and we were very disappointed by that. We felt betrayed, and we see some kind of hypocrisy and disconnect in their argument. They're saying like Black Lives Matter, but what about all the 75 million Korean lives in Korea? So like we want to definitely continue to like educate the left and also to talk to our conservatives among the Korean Americans to kind of, just have more communication.
Since it's such a broad question, we didn't get time to get into like details, but some common themes that popped up in our discussion was the need for coalition building and the need for mutual education. Nodutdol's social media strategy came up as a thing, and it's something that we're working on. Also, Haejong, one of our members, pointed out the, in South Korea right now, everything that they're discussing is very concrete, and so maybe as we continue to strategize and build, we need to bring more concreteness into our discussions about what we're doing. I'm sorry if I'm missing anything. Did I miss anything? I mean, I know this.
Well, just the stuff about the military and the militarized foreign policy.
All right, as we discuss it, the way we discuss it can be unified under the concept of a militarized foreign policy. And so organizations such as Labor Against War have done campaigns like Move the Money. And so a lot of times it's about how we talk about it. But then another participant said, we've been doing education for like so long. But then another said that things seem to be changing. So there were no easy answers.
I shared in my group actually that we could really use some folks to help with condensing some of the information that you heard during the presentation today, into something that's like little tidbits that we can put out to the public, either via social media or maybe in a handout. So capacity building is also important, I think, to be able to do this work and move towards true Korean peace. My group, we had some really great questions come up that I just wanted to highlight. We were discussing North Korea as an anti-imperialist project / experiment in socialism. One question that came up that we discussed a little bit was, is North Korea practicing real socialism? Their system is working by building infrastructure and helping their people, and so isn't that enough? And the last one I just want to highlight is, how do we talk about reunification with community? With the left, with friends, with people who are talking about the news cycle, and stuff like that, because it's hard to break down, right? 70-year history with various folks.
I'm Michael Zweig from the U.S. Labor Against the War, and I just wanted to bring to this meeting the results of resolution that U.S. Labor Against the War brought to the American Federation of Teachers. That's a union of 1,750,000 people around the country. We just had our national convention in Pittsburgh, and through one of our locals, we have about 25 locals affiliated with U.S. Labor Against the War just in AFT. This passed. Whereas the United States government has a key role to play in securing a stable peace on the Korean Peninsula, and whereas the American Federation of Teachers wishes to stand in solidarity with the people of South Korea and the unions and workers of the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions, Resolved that the American Federation of Teachers recognizes the right of the Korean people in both North and South Korea to determine together the conditions for peace and security on the Korean Peninsula. Resolved that the AFT calls upon the government of the United States to respect the peace process now underway between the governments of North and South Korea and to contribute to it by recognizing that the shape of peace and development on the Korean Peninsula is a matter for the Korean people to decide. B, declaring that it will not engage in a first strike military action on the Korean Peninsula. C, declaring that it has no interest in fomenting regime change on the Korean Peninsula. Also declaring that with regard to the deployment of U.S. military forces, including the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Missile System, that's THAAD, now in early and highly contested stages of construction in South Korea, the United States will respect the wishes of the Korean people, including with, should they demand it, fully withdrawing U.S. military forces from the peninsula, and refraining from any activity that would sabotage the peace process among the Korean people while negotiating in good faith a peace treaty with North Korea. And resolve that the AFT will forward this resolution to the President of the United States and his Secretary of State, as well as to the appropriate congressional and Senate leaders, and to U.S. Labor Against the War for circulation in the labor movement in the United States and South Korea. That passed the convention, not just the International Committee, but it was declared a priority, and it was sent to the entire convention and passed. So we are happy to say that we have been able to get, at least in the teachers union, some traction for this, and I would encourage everybody to take a resolution like this to your organization and work with the Korean community here in the United States and in Korea to advance the American contribution to this whole peace process.
We have to take a picture.
Right.
Proliferate peace and unlearn war. Maybe under that. Still. Don't move. This is panorama.
Yeah,